Okay, for the next step in our administration, we've been putting in some of the background information and things, and we're going to move on to receipts and disbursements, of course, a really big piece of the process. And for this, we're going to go to a different case that has more data built into it, so you don't have to watch me entering a bunch of cases. And so we're going to go down here and visit President Hayes. And so this is a case that's been previously built out. You're familiar with the screen by now. And let's go ahead and go to receipts. And so we've entered a lot of receipts already in this over time. You can always add a new receipt. I'll show you that in a moment. But for now, let's look at our assets or receipts and income screen. So it's going to list out all the assets however we've described them. It's going to list the date of death or starting value for each asset that you enter into it. And then as things get liquidated, sold, whatever it is you do with them, then they're going to go ahead and list them, what those proceeds turn out to be. And again, we can always delete and we can always go back in and edit things. Now, for this vehicle and this vehicle, you see an NP. And what that is that's a non-probate vehicle. That is a vehicle that, in this example, is going to a surviving spouse by statutory allowance. We still go ahead and list it because, of course, a number of the probate pleadings request that information. And so we've gone ahead and you'll still enter that. But you'll see here in a moment that you can check for that to be a spousal transfer. And so it just gets marked as NP. So you know that it's off of your plate. You don't need to worry about it as you're going through administering. By having this screen layout this way, it also gives you the benefit of sort of keeping track of what assets have and have not yet been dealt with. I have to sheepishly admit there have been a few times in my practice that we got close to the end of administration and realized that there was one asset somewhere that we had not done anything with, and suddenly we had to turn our attention to that and take care of it quickly. And so this is nice to have this in the screen that you can see what the status is. So if you open this up today, you'd see, okay, I've got some non-probate vehicles, and we have a boat that we haven't yet done anything with. We've got a piece of real estate we haven't yet done anything with. And obviously what you might end up doing is an in-kind transfer, but you'll know that you still have the asset and that liquidation has not occurred yet. Okay. And so let's take a look at adding a receipt. And so if we go up to this button, we can add a new one in. And we break down into a few different sections for your receipt screen. And again, we have a sort of a mantra in building this software that we want you to have to touch the data as few times as possible. We don't like the idea of you having to retype things multiple times, list things in multiple places, go through and select where something has to be put. Those are all things that we consider as unnecessary friction and waste. And so we've tried to make it so you're only going to revisit a screen maybe a couple or a few times total. You're going to enter the data hopefully one time for any given issue, and then the software is going to do the rest of the work for you. So as we look at this idea of entering a new receipt, and actually, I'm sorry, I'm going to go out and I'll show you one that's already been entered just to save you from having to watch me do some typing. And so let's start out with this 2014 Harley. And so we've listed it. Of course, it's not an account, but if it was, we could list the account number. Once again, you do not have to use personal identifiers for EstateAssist to be powerful. You could leave that blank and just go with the alternative public identifier if it were an account. And again, there's a video on that topic and talking about online security issues, that kind of information. We have the initial value or date of death value, whatever it is you start with, and we have the date that the asset is received. And you'll notice if we're doing a new asset or a new receipt, this is going to default to the date the fiduciary is appointed. Now, it's important to keep in mind, if you start adding assets before you have put the fiduciary appointment date in your case details screen, then you're going to have a problem. It's not going to know where to default to. And so in that case, you're going to need to select the date it's received. Now, why do we use the date of fiduciary appointment? Well, because that's the date on which the fiduciary has become responsible for this. That's the date on which the fiduciary has received the estate. We consider that the starting point for the fiduciary taking things over. You can select a different date if you wish for the date the asset is received. But understand that your 6.0 and 6.1, your inventory documentation, is going to use the date the fiduciary is appointed, that's the date that they're inventorying for, when those things came into their possession. And then also that keeps out things that may be received later. So if you have an inventory, it's going to pull all the data, all the receipts that were in hands at the time of death when the fiduciary is appointed. But maybe you have an income or a refund or something that happens months and months later in the course of the administration. That would not be listed on your 6.0 and 6.1. If for some reason you want it to be, then just select the date of fiduciary appointment and that'll work. If it's appraised, you'll check that it's appraised. So that's our general asset or receipt information, just sort of identifying it at the beginning. Our next section is on the asset or receipt type. And so we have our tangible personal property, intangible personal property, real property, income, and other receipts. And for some of these, there's sub-information. So if it's a motor vehicle that's a probate asset, we're going to put the VIN number so that the software can use that to specify the vehicle. If it were a financial account, we're going to gather some information on the financial institution. If it's stock or bond, we're going to have the transfer information, transfer agent information. If it's real estate, we're going to have the parcel number and if it's going to be transferred someday by certificate of transfer, you can enter in the proposed COT number. Other things, like I said, you could have a non-probate vehicle. You would check that instead. Other kinds of subcategories for these. But you're going to select one category of receipt type to help the software categorize your asset or receipt properly in all the different documents. Our next section is intended disposition. And this is simply getting at the idea of what is it, when you put the asset in, what is it you think you're going to do with it at some point? Are you going to sell it or transfer it in kind? If you're going to sell it, will it be by public or private? So on. And of course, you're familiar with the forms for administration. All these things are gathering information to decide where these assets should get listed on certain things. Now, when we talk about intended disposition, that's not going to determine what must happen with it. You could go back in and amend this at any time. But it is going to decide some things like when things might go on forms like in the 9s and 10s and things like that. So if you've selected something saying that it's supposed to be sold, it'll automatically list that on the application to sell personal property in case you do not have authority in your will. And so intended disposition is just sort of lining those things up for where they're going to default to. And again, that can all be changed later. Maybe more importantly, and what will apply to an awful lot or the vast majority of your receipts, is the receipt disposition section. Okay, that eventually every asset gets disposed of in some way. And so we can have it sold or liquidated. And by the way, we would ask you to treat cash checks and things like that as a liquidation process. Just basically that we are transacting a receipt, an asset in the estate, and turning it into something different. And you're going to put in your gross proceeds and your net proceeds. A lot of times those are the same, but of course, with things like real estate closing costs, you will have some differences sometimes. And the date that happens. And so if you sold a house, it'd be the date of the closing. If you deposited a check, the date it was deposited. If you liquidated a bank account, the date that it was liquidated, and so on. And then if those receipts, if that receipt, once it's liquidated, if the proceeds are deposited into the estate bank account, which would be normal, then you're going to check that to confirm that that has occurred, and you're going to select the date that happened as well. And oftentimes those will be the same or within just a few days of each other. If instead of liquidation and deposit, you transfer in kind, then you'll go ahead and check here that it's transferred in kind and the date of that transfer. Note, you will still have to make a corresponding disbursement for the transfer to be recognized as outgoing on your 13s. And we'll talk about that more when we do our video on disbursements here shortly. At the bottom of the screen, we do have a section for notes. Of course, you've seen the video probably on notes section, case notes for the case, but you may want to keep some individual notes on an asset. You know, hey, we received an offer to sell this. Here's the person's name and phone number, you know, whatever. You might want to have something specific to the receipt. And so if that's the case, you can just put those notes in here and that'll save when you save the screen. And then also, of course, real estate brings some special things with it. You can put your real property description, your survey description in this window to automatically populate documents. And we know that throughout the state, people have different positions on how they like to identify their real estate in your filings. And so while some documents will automatically pull the survey description, so like say the 12.1 will automatically pull your survey description and put that in where it goes. Some documents, people have different preferences, and so we have different options, specifically 6.1, 13.1, and 13.2. If you leave it on the default of no additional description, then what you'll end up with is going to be the original description. And, you know, up here it might say real property located at XYZ address. And then it will also show your parcel number in a parentheses. And that'll be listed wherever your assets need to be listed. So on a 6.1, a 13.1, you know, any of the documents in the 5s, if you have an asset listed and it's real estate, it'll just pull that normal description and parcel number. However, you may be one of the folks that says, well, I want to be more specific than just description and parcel number. Maybe I want my legal description, my survey. And so for each of these forms, you have a couple of options. You can select to transport the full legal description into your document, or you could select to reference it as an attached exhibit. And if that's your choice, then over here you can put however you like to list your exhibits. So we could have Exhibit A, Exhibit 1, whatever your preference. If you've selected to include the full description, it's going to pull whatever's in this box and put it on those documents right after your general description. So it might say real property located at 123 West Main Street, and then the parcel number, and then it will take your description from this box and it'll put it right afterward on your pleadings. If you reference it as an exhibit, then it will say real property located at 123 West Main Street and the parcel number, and then it'll say see attached exhibit A in this example. And so you have all the different options you might want to identify real estate in what you're doing with these different documents. Okay. And so those are the things we do to add a receipt, and all receipts get listed out here. One more issue, well, I'll stay away. I'm going to come back in a moment. When you see the video on estate account tracking, you'll see a little bit more about receipts and the liquidation. Thanks.